8 years had passed, and at the class reunion, I felt utterly mortified under the gaze of everyone. Meanwhile, he made a dazzling entrance with his girlfriend. Surrounded by admiration, I mechanically opened the wine bottle, trying my best to maintain the professionalism expected of a server. Burgess Hudson extended his hand with a detached expression. "Sylvia, long time no see." I stared at his cufflinks, each one worth a year's salary for me. The dream he once wrote in every book of mine, "Sylvia, let's get married after graduation," had finally shattered. Was it awkward? No, it was, to be precise, humiliating. It felt as though I were standing on a stage, stripped bare, exposed to everyone's scrutiny. I wanted to escape, but I didn't even have the courage to run away. 8 years later, they had grown from the little princes and princesses of their families into independent, successful entrepreneurs and leaders. Meanwhile, I had fallen from a high position, having roared, wept, and resisted, only to eventually bow to fate. I lived on a meager salary, too afraid to even take a day off. "Sylvia, you used to have such a fiery temper. I never expected you to handle a service job so calmly." "Yeah, we used to be under your thumb all the time. Why did you block us all back then?" "Everyone has their troubles. You don't know. There were rumors at school that you threatened his parents for money," using Burgess Hudson's name. "Come on, don't say that. Sylvia isn't like that. It must be a misunderstanding." "Right, Sylvia." They spoke lightly, with friendly smiles on their faces, but their words were grating into my ears. I had to smile back, especially with him there. I had fantasized countless times about running into him and rehearsed various ways to greet him. I thought I would greet him with a radiant smile, just like in high school, playfully waving then saying, "Burgess, long time no see. Have you missed me?" But when I actually saw him, my heart, whether by life's trials, was in such a flurry that I just wanted to find a hole to hide in. All my courage was crushed under their scrutiny. As I was at a loss, Burgess Hudson withdrew his hand, ignoring their recent conversation, and raised his glass to toast everyone. Instantly, they ignored my presence. After all, they couldn't afford to overlook the significance of Burgess Hudson's words over a trivial post in our chat. I sighed with relief and seized the chance to leave the private room. As I listened to the cheerful noise behind me, I tried to stay calm, but my back was already drenched in cold sweat. A colleague noticed my pale face and asked softly, "Sylvia, are you feeling sick?" I said it was nothing, but how could it be nothing? Even though I knew I should face reality, and that losing my job wasn't worth it for a bit of pride, it still felt like ripping open old scars. Just then, the door behind me opened, and I instinctively wanted to flee, but my legs felt like lead. "Let's have a word alone." Years had passed, and the boy from high school who wore black glasses had grown into a distinguished gentleman. His gaze, once gentle, was now sharp and profound. I instinctively wanted to refuse, but after Burgess Hudson asked a colleague if there was a free room and walked straight over, I had no choice but to follow quietly. He had grown taller and more robust from behind. He no longer resembled the lean teenager from before. The only thing unchanged was his habit of walking with one hand in his pocket. Burgess Hudson entered the private room first. I hesitated for a moment before mustering the courage to go in. As soon as I entered, the room was filled with a sharp smell of smoke. He was smoking, something he used to hate. "How long have you been working here?" My eyes began to sting with tears, but thankfully, the dim lighting in the room concealed my long-suppressed grievances. "Almost a year." Burgess Hudson was silent for a moment. "I haven't seen you around." Had he already returned to the country? I forced a faint smile to mask the bitterness inside. "I was in the lobby before. Just got promoted these past few days to handle VIP rooms." After a long pause, Burgess Hudson remained silent. I fiddled with my fingers, trying to regain my composure. "If there's nothing else, I'll get back to work." Before I could react, Burgess Hudson had already left. As he passed by me, his familiar yet distant face was filled with detachment and coldness. "You're fired." I stared at his retreating back in shock. "What?" Without turning around, Burgess Hudson's voice was cold and unfeeling. "From this place." If I had my old temper, I would have slapped him and told him to speak properly. But now, I didn't even have the courage to question him. Burgess Hudson acted swiftly, so quickly that I wondered if I had done something to hurt him in the past. Otherwise, why would the manager come with cash just minutes later to have me leave immediately? If I had caused harm, there was indeed one thing. After the manager left, a colleague asked in surprise what had happened. I looked at the money in my hand and laughed wryly. "The manager is generous, giving me 2 extra months' salary for my severance." Even though my heart ached, life didn't allow me to stop. As I left, I realized that the hotel, which used to be so accessible, now seemed like it was reaching the clouds. Without my uniform, I'd never have entry again. It felt much like how ordinary days turned into unattainable luxury 8 years ago. The difference now was that this stark contrast felt like a release. I had Burgess Hudson to thank for all of this. The person who had been sealed in my heart for years whom I had chosen to forget. The one who, with his hand in his pocket, would casually pull out a lollipop and ask gently, "Do you want one?" I hadn't expected Sophia, to be the first to come knocking after 8 years. It wasn't entirely surprising, though, as she had been very fond of Burgess Hudson back then. She told me she left for the same university a few months after Burgess Hudson and lived in the same neighborhood. Although Burgess Hudson always kept her at a distance, her persistent efforts finally won him over in their first year of grad school. They fell in love, worked hard, and moved toward a common goal. Burgess Hudson was incredibly business-minded and brilliant. During his first year of grad school, he published papers and invented a pen that sold for $10 million. They used that money to start a company. At school, they were the perfect pair, and in the company, they were the ideal partners. Originally, Burgess Hudson didn't want to return to the country, but it was because she missed her hometown that they decided to develop their business here. Recently, both sets of parents had met to discuss the wedding. As I listened to her happily recount their story, I feigned congratulatory words. Sophia with her confident smile, said, "Sylvia, although it's been a long time, old feelings can't just be forgotten. So, I hope you'll stay away from Burgess. If you need anything, you can talk to me." Although I knew she might not believe me, I firmly told her I had no needs and wouldn't disturb Burgess Hudson. Sophia thanked me and pointed to the skincare products she brought, saying, "Our company developed these. They are very good." After she left, I stared at the gift box for a long time, feeling envious of their every detail. I thought I'd never see Burgess Hudson again, but unexpectedly, I encountered him abruptly once more. Though still somewhat subdued, my previous experience had helped me maintain a calmer mindset. Knowing he didn't want to see me, I, with self-awareness, made a quick exit before he could speak. "Sorry to bother you, I'll leave now." Burgess Hudson, holding a cup of coffee, turned and walked into the room. "Have you reviewed the contract?" I was momentarily confused about his meaning. Not receiving a response, Burgess Hudson turned back with a sharp gaze and repeated, "Have you reviewed the contract?" I realized then that he didn't mean to find a new nanny, but was simply referring to the terms of employment. I needed money badly, considering the $30,000 salary. I forced a shallow professional smile. "Yes, I've reviewed and memorized it." Burgess Hudson was silent for a few seconds, his voice cold. "Live-in nanny." What others said didn't matter, but his words were indeed a bit off. However, if he didn't care, why should I be overly sensitive? "If you don't mind seeing me, I hope you'll give me the chance to work." After all, the bank's interest wouldn't stop just because I was unemployed. Moreover, this job paid almost double what I made at the hotel, meaning I could pay off my debt faster. Burgess Hudson's expression suddenly darkened, a hint of sarcasm at his lips. "Sylvia, you really are willing to sacrifice anything for money." If I had thought he was just reminding me of the live-in requirement earlier, now it was clear he saw me as unworthy. I hadn't expected him to think so poorly of me. I wanted to say something, but under his scrutiny, everything seemed like an excuse. Yes, with such a high salary, and the specific mention of a male employer, anyone would suspect inappropriate relationships. But I had focused on the money and took the job with a bit of luck. "If you think it's not suitable, please contact our company to find another candidate." After forcing a calm tone, I quickly turned and fled. Though cold stares and grievances had become routine over the years, it was still disheartening to be heard every time the collar of my coat was grabbed from behind, and despite struggling, I couldn't free myself. Tears spilled uncontrollably. "Burgess, I'm not for sale." The simple statement drained all my energy. Although it might seem weak and unconvincing to him, it was all I had left. The collar was loosened, and I heard Burgess Hudson's confused voice from behind. "Sylvia, you used to be so proud. Like a queen. You never humbled yourself." I stood there dazed. Indeed, as he said, I used to be like that. But back then, I had the confidence to back it up. Now, I have nothing. My family, and Burgess Hudson's family, lived in the same neighborhood because our parents were friends. After we were born, our parents often took us to various early education classes, amusement parks, and tourist spots. Although we didn't remember it, the photo albums our parents kept were the best proof. Whenever we looked at those childhood photos together, it always led to a burst of mutual teasing. Later on, we went to the same kindergarten, the same elementary school, and then middle school and high school. So, I suppose we could be considered childhood friends. He was 3 months older than me. When we were little, our parents made me call him Big Brother, and I always liked to follow him around, sweetly calling him Burgess. In elementary school, I often copied his homework. In middle school, I frequently had him help with my assignments. In high school, I called him Burgess Hudson, and often treated him like a personal servant. Our classmates joked that I, the queen, was incredibly domineering with my little brother, Burgess. At school, I was like a crab, walking sideways. Whenever there was unkindness or unfairness among classmates, I would always be involved. And whether the parties involved were satisfied or not, I was always happy with how I handled things. Once, Burgess Hudson asked, "Sylvia, aren't you afraid of getting beaten up with all your shenanigans?" I gave him a mischievous smile and hooked my arm around his neck. "Burgess, you underestimate me. I've been navigating the world for over a decade. Who could I possibly be afraid of?" Back then, I was flamboyant, arrogant, and overbearing, much like an Eastern emperor. But everything changed during the winter break of our senior year. In the blink of an eye, we went bankrupt. Creditors came knocking, and the large villa seemed especially cramped. I watched as my parents were surrounded by people, seeing them pale and pleading for more time. After the crowd left, the once pristine living room was a mess. I knew something was wrong at home, but I hadn't imagined it would be this bad. That night, I called Burgess Hudson and chatted with him about what was happening at home. He reassured me not to worry, saying, "My uncle and the others will take care of it." His tone was serious, and I even laughed at him for sounding old-fashioned. Later, distracted by my own concerns, I forgot about it and invited him to play an escape room game the next day. Burgess Hudson agreed, but I ended up standing him up as I was happily heading downstairs to go out. My parents stopped me with serious expressions. I don't remember their exact words, but I recall them saying that the villa had to be sold to pay off debts. There was no money left, and they had already arranged for me to transfer schools. I angrily demanded to know why they made these decisions without my consent. My mother, wiping her tears, put several boxes in front of me and firmly told me to go upstairs and pack my things. I kicked the boxes aside in frustration, stormed outside, and declared that whoever wanted to pack could do it themselves. My father grabbed my hand. "Sylvia, do you know how much it costs to play an escape room? Do you know how much tuition is?" I didn't understand because I had never thought about money before high school. When we went out, a parent always accompanied us and paid. After high school, when we went out, everyone took turns paying, but my share was always covered by Burgess Hudson. When I bought things, I used my parents' supplementary cards. My father opened his phone and showed me all his bank accounts, one by one. I was stunned, thinking my eyes were deceiving me, and when I checked my mother's account, it was just as empty. "Sylvia, do you remember how, because of a 2-point difference, you didn't get into the same middle school as Burgess Hudson? Dad had to entertain people, almost ending up in the hospital." Of course, I remembered. After school started, I even bragged to Burgess Hudson, "Don't think you can escape my grasp." Burgess Hudson sighed, "If you had focused more on your studies, you could have saved hundreds of thousands." Back then, grades weren't the only important thing. Family background mattered too. I went to an international school in high school. Looking back now, I realize I was truly spoiled. I wiped away my tears and turned back to him with a faint smile. "Burgess, didn't you already say that was in the past?" Now, life had worn away all my sharp edges. Burgess Hudson furrowed his brow, seemingly questioning if he had recognized the right person. But what mattered now was that before looking for another job, I needed to find out if it was related to him and keep my distance. "I'm often not home. The instructions are in the attachment. Also, unless it's a special situation, you're not allowed to leave the villa. Can you manage that?" I was surprised that he had changed his mind and felt a bit like giving up. Now, he belonged to Sophia Watt, but the Burgess Hudson of 8 years later was even more decisive, not giving me any time to hesitate. He grabbed my hand and stamped his red handprint on the contract. In 8 days, I successfully got hired as the live-in maid for Burgess Hudson's household. After adding a clause to the contract that day, Burgess Hudson left and didn't show up for 3 days. My job was to clean the villa from top to bottom every day. Although the villa was large, his belongings were minimal. Besides some ornaments and books, there was hardly any sign of life, as if the house was only used for him to relax during occasional breaks. The task I enjoyed the most was watering the garden and feeding the fish in the pond. These days were the most relaxed I'd had in years. One evening, as I came out of the kitchen with a bowl of freshly cooked instant noodles, I ran into Burgess Hudson. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. "I'm sorry, I used your pot to cook the noodles." Burgess Hudson frowned. I thought he would turn and go upstairs displeased, but instead, he sat our day down at the dining table just in time. "I haven't eaten yet." I glanced at the noodles in the pot, awkwardly setting it aside. "Sorry, I didn't know you would come back, so I didn't prepare dinner. If you want, you can have some bread first, and I'll cook a new bowl of noodles." Burgess Hudson only gave a slight nod. I sighed in relief and rushed back to the kitchen. Luckily, I had splurged that day and bought the tomatoes and a bunch of greens. As I was about to finish stir-frying the vegetables, Burgess Hudson's voice came from behind me. "When did you learn to cook?" I was startled and instinctively replied, "Probably during senior year." After saying that, the air fell into a long silence. I stared blankly at the bubbling pot, feeling like it was another world. Back then, I only did the tasks assigned by school: washing vegetables, and handling a spatula. I didn't even know how to turn on the fire, let alone cook. Now, I wished I could master every skill. Indeed, people are often forced to adapt. Burgess Hudson didn't say anything and turned to leave the kitchen. When I brought out the tomato and egg noodles, he was sitting at the dining table, eating the upgraded instant noodles I had prepared. It included vegetables, tomatoes, ham, and eggs, a meal I had been dreaming about for over a month. Burgess Hudson glanced at me. "Why are you just standing there? Aren't you hungry?" I walked over with a bowl and blurted out without thinking, "You used to avoid eating this kind of junk food." Back then, he used to sigh in helplessness, trying to control my consumption of junk food. The atmosphere became awkward again. I cursed myself for being so stupid and saying things I shouldn't have. Just as I was about to apologize, Burgess Hudson picked up some noodles and soup from my bowl and walked away. It tastes good." My face flushed instantly, and my heart started racing. He then casually added, "Better than instant noodles." I instinctively wanted to offer a different dish, but, realizing he had already eaten, pushed the bowl in front of him. "Don't eat the instant noodles. Have this instead. I'll cook another bowl." Burgess Hudson didn't look up. "Is there more food in the fridge?" "No," because I didn't know when he would return, so I didn't prepare any ingredients. However, I had plenty of instant noodles. Yes, I stocked up on various flavors of instant noodles. "Also, could you please let me know in advance next time you're coming back, so I can prepare a proper meal?" Burgess Hudson set down his utensils, his gaze scrutinizing. "When I'm not home, you don't need to eat." With that, he stood up with clear anger and walked straight to the kitchen, rummaging through the cabinets. When he saw the 10 or so packets of instant noodles, he threw them straight into the trash. I hurried to pick them up, but he grabbed my wrist and threw me back at the dining table. "From now on, no junk food is allowed in this house." I was stunned. It was the first time I had seen him so furious. "Got it, but throwing them away is such a waste." "I'll take them home." Burgess Hudson glared at me, his eyes fiery but restrained. I didn't know why he was so angry, but the best way to handle an angry employer was to admit my fault. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." Burgess Hudson suddenly deflated, his clear eyes filled with helplessness. His tone even carried a sense of defeat. "Sylvia, you really know how to torment people." With that, he turned and left with large strides. I stood there, stunned, struggling to process his words. "I torment people." After cleaning up the dishes, I sat cross-legged on the sofa, reminiscing about the past. At that moment, the door opened, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Burgess Hudson glared at me. "This is my home. I can't return," I replied. I didn't say he couldn't return. I just thought that since he had left so angrily, he would stay away for a few days. Burgess Hudson said nothing more. Instead, he carried the shopping bag into the kitchen. "From now on, the fridge must never be empty." I nodded immediately, afraid of displeasing him again. "And, didn't I leave you any money for living expenses?" Confronted with the question, I weakly nodded. "You weren't home. How could I bring myself to spend the money he gave me?" Before I could finish speaking, I was suddenly pulled into a warm embrace. "Sylvia, what's going on in your head?" "What's going through my mind? Probably guilt. After all, I had promised Sophia Watt to stay away from him, but I hadn't done so. A few days ago, Sophia came to see me and gave me a set of skincare products from your company. They were very expensive." Burgess Hudson looked at me with a deep, scrutinizing gaze. "What else did she say?" My palms were sweating, and I could barely find my voice. "She said you two are a good match." Burgess Hudson sneered. "Really?" I nodded, because that was his choice. Burgess Hudson slowly drew me back into his embrace and asked with a tempting tone, "I have a lot of money now. Don't you have any thoughts about that?" I stood stiffly, like I had fallen into an icy pond. My mind had stopped working, yet I was extremely greedy for the warmth his embrace provided. "No, I don't." Burgess Hudson spoke calmly, feeling aggrieved. "Are you?" I didn't respond, fearing that I might burst into tears. If I had known it would end up like this, I would have preferred if he had ignored me altogether. At least then, I could have kept the good memories I had of him. Burgess Hudson sighed deeply and placed his large hand on my head. "I really don't know what to do with you. Sylvia, are you trying to make me mad on purpose?" He was the one causing the pain, yet he looked so defeated and aggrieved. Burgess Hudson straightened up, his gaze intense. "Don't you have any questions?" I took a step back, avoiding his gaze nervously. "Are you sick?" Burgess Hudson lifted his chin arrogantly, pointing at the ingredients. "Hurry up and clean up." After he left the kitchen, I was overwhelmed by nervousness and a rapid beating of my heart. Once the initial calm passed, all that remained was confusion and uncertainty. After I finished cleaning up, Burgess Hudson didn't go upstairs, but sat on the sofa watching the news. When he heard my footsteps, he didn't turn around, "Sit down, and let's talk for a bit." I hesitated but declined his offer. "What's done is done. Let the past stay in the past." "Burgess, would you like me to prepare some fruit or tea?" Burgess Hudson turned around with an annoyed look. Is Tom breaking no argument? Sit. Seeing no other option, I forced myself to sit down on one side of the sofa. He said we were going to talk, but he remained silent for a long time. I fidgeted with my fingers, unable to hold my patience. Burgess, if there's nothing else, I'll head upstairs. Burgess Hudson sighed subtly. Why didn't you reply to my messages back then? I sent you over 100 messages. I knew that, but at the time, I didn't have the courage to open them. On the day we were supposed to hang out, I cried as I packed my things and moved with my parents from the villa to my grandparents' house outside the 6th Ring Road. But it wasn't the county little villa with a yard I was used to. It was an old apartment in a rundown complex, with just over 8 square meters and 2 rooms and a living room. That night, I lay on the bed in the living room, staring at the dim wall, crying myself to sleep under the blanket. The next day, I took out my phone and saw the missed calls and carrying messages from him. Instinctively, I wanted to pour out my troubles to him and arranged to meet him at noon. However, during breakfast, my parents, with a mix of regret and hope, asked if I could get Burgess Hudson to convince his parents to help our family through a tough time. I asked how much we still needed. They looked serious and only said that the Hudsons could resolve it. I agreed and, after breakfast, took a cab to find Burgess Hudson. But when I arrived at the meeting spot and saw Burgess Hudson with a deeply furrowed brow, I hesitated. Could a child solve problems that adults couldn't? After the agreed time had passed, Burgess Hudson texted me asking where I was. I told him there was traffic, and he said it was fine. Half an hour later, Burgess Hudson began to fidget and texted me to find a nearby place, saying he would come to find me. I agreed and then promptly blocked his number. I watched as the Hudsons arrived, looking anxious, and saw him argue and finally leave in frustration. Back at home, facing my parents' gazes, I felt guilty and remorseful, but could only shatter their last hope. His parents suddenly showed up and took Burgess away. In an instant, my parents seemed to age considerably. Soon, Burgess Hudson was sent abroad by his parents. Before he left, he sent many messages, hoping to see me one last time. I went and watched his figure disappear in the distance, watched the plane carry him away. Time really does fly. Burgess, we're just employer and employee. Burgess Hudson's eyes were sharp, and he sneered. Sylvia, now you understand the difference in our statuses. I lowered my head, too ashamed to speak. Why are you silent now? Didn't you boldly call my parents asking for money back then? His words felt like a harsh slap, painfully yet unspoken. Indeed, I had threatened his parents for money back then, but it was under their pleading. After he went abroad, his relationship with his uncle and aunt deteriorated, and to cut off his emotional ties and let him focus on his studies, his parents asked me to say some harsh words to make him give up on me. That's how the rumor about me extorting his parents, using his feelings started. So, you agreeing to stay is for revenge? Burgess Hudson suddenly stood up and asked coldly, do you think so? I opened my mouth but lacked the courage to voice my thoughts. Since there's no future and he despises me, let him despise me. If this will help you feel better, Burgess, then so be it. Burgess Hudson shot me a fierce look and stormed out, angrier than ever. As I watched him go upstairs, I respectfully asked, Burgess, what time will you have breakfast tomorrow morning? Burgess Hudson paused, his tone icy. 7:00 in the morning. I got up early to prepare breakfast. Burgess Hudson came downstairs about 20 minutes earlier than usual and reached for a bottle of water from the fridge. Instinctively, I stopped him. That's not good for your stomach. The soy milk is ready. While speaking, I quickly poured the soy milk into a cup and placed the freshly made sandwiches on a plate, setting them on the dining table. Once breakfast was ready, I felt a bit of happiness. Is this okay? If it's not to your liking, you can order something else. I prepared everything based on his previous breakfast preferences. Burgess Hudson's demeanor returned to his usual coldness, as if last night's discomfort hadn't happened at all. He took a few sips of the soy milk, tried the sandwiches, fried dough sticks, and dumplings before slowly speaking. Your boyfriend is quite lucky. I forced a smile. Who would be foolish enough to marry someone like me? Not knowing what I had done wrong, Burgess Hudson's expression darkened instantly. I hesitated, and to avoid saying something wrong, I carefully headed back to the kitchen. As soon as I stepped into the kitchen, Burgess Hudson's cold voice came from behind. Aren't you having breakfast? I took a deep breath and politely turned around. Burgess, I'll be eating in the kitchen. Together, I felt a bit awkward. Burgess, as part of my professional training, I can't sit at the same table as my employer. Burgess Hudson sneered. Why didn't you mention this last night? I was speechless. When did it become so difficult? Thinking of his girlfriend, I quickly apologized. Sorry, Burgess, I won't let that happen again. Burgess Hudson put down his utensils and walked directly to me. Under my confused gaze, he roughly grabbed my collar and threw me onto the chair. Eat. I stared at him, My thoughts, which I had sorted out all night, became jumbled once more. Burgess, it wouldn't look good if your girlfriend saw this. Burgess Hudson's eyes were sharp. You just found out I have a girlfriend. I admitted to having some selfish feelings towards him, but now I had none and couldn't dare to have any. Burgess, the salary you offer is $5,000 more than other places. Of course, you can terminate my contract at any time. This way, everyone can avoid seeing each other. Burgess Hudson snorted twice, picked up a Frido stick, and walked out. Sylvia, put your little schemes away. If you want to act like nothing happened, you'll have to forget it. In the afternoon, Burgess Hudson texted asking for a more sumptuous dinner. After finishing the cleaning, I went to the supermarket to buy ingredients and then hurriedly prepared the meal. As soon as the main dishes were ready, the kitchen door was pulled open. I thought it was Burgess Hudson and respectfully said, Burgess, please wait a moment. There are 2 more vegetable dishes coming up soon. Sylvia, it's really you. A familiar voice rang out, and I paused, finally seeing who it was. Although Sophia Watt had a smile on her face, her eyes were extremely cold. Even though there was nothing between Burgess Hudson and me, I still felt like I had been caught red-handed. I forced a natural smile. Hello, the food will be ready soon. Could you please let Burgess know? Sophia Watt remained silent, glanced at the dishes, and then said with a smile, I didn't expect your cooking skills to be this good. Where did you learn? She said it so lightly, as if she didn't really care. I learned it for a while in a hotel kitchen, and then I attended a nanny training organized by the company. Sophia Watt's eyes widened in surprise. You're really impressive. Does someone like you earn a high salary? Knowing her hostility, I just smiled faintly. Sophia, the kitchen is quite smoky. Sophia Watt's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by questioning eyes. Sylvia, do you know the nature of my relationship with Burgess? Before I could explain, her tone became rigid. Didn't you promise me you will leave? I can introduce you to a higher-paying employer. The offer was tempting. I have a 1-year contract with a penalty for breaking it. Sophia Watt dismissed this with a wave. I'll cover the penalty. At this point, there was no more to discuss. Moreover, I had indeed taken a wrong turn. Withdrawing was the best choice. All right, I'll tell Burgess tomorrow. Sophia Watt was finally satisfied as she walked out of the kitchen. Don't forget to prepare the dessert. About 10 minutes later, Burgess Hudson arrived. It seemed that they had a bit of an argument in the living room. I couldn't hear the details from where I was. After a while, Burgess Hudson entered the kitchen with a gloomy expression. What did she say to you? I asked. I shook my head. Sophia didn't say anything to me. The food is ready. Burgess, do you want to eat now? Burgess Hudson nodded and took 2 plates of food out. By the time I collected myself and brought out the food, Sophia Watt was no longer in sight. I'm sorry for the trouble, I said. Burgess Hudson's expression was calm. Sylvia, today is your birthday. Only then did I notice the cake box on the table. It had been so long since I celebrated a birthday that I had almost forgotten. But why did you remember? And why bring it up now? Tears welled up in my eyes as I said, thank you for the thought, but I don't celebrate birthdays. Burgess Hudson slowly opened the cake box. It's from the place you used to order from for your birthdays. As the beautifully decorated cake was revealed, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. They flowed uncontrollably. Burgess, I was wrong. I shouldn't have come into your life. I shouldn't have harbored any illusions, or been greedy for a moment of time together. Burgess Hudson calmly opened the package containing the utensils and handed them to me. Sylvia, when did you become so emotional? After he left, I often found myself hiding away to cry alone for a long time. But later, I learned that crying didn't solve anything, and I cried less. Yet, when he appeared, tears seemed to flow like they were worthless. It's like I'm getting more and more pathetic as time goes on. Burgess Hudson was disturbingly calm. He stubbornly placed the knife in my hand, then took my hand and guided me to the cake, cutting a slice. Throughout, I felt like a puppet without a soul, just being led by him. He tasted the cake with a bright smile on his face. This guy, he's turned into someone truly terrible. It's as if he's cutting right into the heart. Sylvia, you used to say that every year. The first slice of cake was always mine. I had said that, but there was a condition. On the first day of the Lunar New Year, when Burgess Hudson had his birthday, his parents had invited many friends and classmates. When Burgess Hudson cut the first slice of cake and handed it to his aunt, it was intercepted by his cousin who had just returned from abroad. Although she was young and no one made a fuss, I couldn't forget it. After the party, I found his cousin with a large piece of birthday cake and threatened her to eat it all. To my intimidation, she ate the cake almost in tears. Burgess Hudson saw this and laughed at how childish I was. Fuming, I didn't want to speak to him. I couldn't even protect a slice of birthday cake. What right did she have to eat the first slice? I stayed quietly in the background. Burgess Hudson laughed with a hint of helplessness. Then from now on, the first slice of cake will always be yours. I knew he was just teasing me, but I was annoyed. HMPH. As if I'm taking advantage of you. It's an equal exchange. I'll give you the first slice of my birthday cake. Whoever can do it is a dog. So, every year, the first slice of cake was ours. This led to much laughter from both our families. It used to be so wonderful. I covered my face, tears slipping through my fingers. Burgess, I'm sorry for the past. I'm sorry for disturbing your peaceful life. I'll stay away from you from now on. Can you forgive me? Burgess Hudson didn't speak. He just walked up to me, took my hands, and said, "So, Sylvia, will you hold my hand and trust me just this once?" His gaze was sincere and firm. "Sylvia, stop pretending you don't understand. You know exactly what I'm saying." I did understand. He was the Burgess Hudson who had treated me like a younger sister since childhood and then cherished me as a future spouse. And because I understood, I couldn't drag him down. That night, I let myself go and left behind the most beautiful memories with him. I traced his brows and cheeks, greedily absorbing his presence. When the clock struck midnight, I disappeared into the night. I could imagine how furious he would be when he woke up, but it was the best choice for us. What I didn't expect was for him to come so quickly. When I packed my things and opened the door, I was met with a stern face. "Sylvia, you've really done well, thinking about what happened the night before." I turned my head away in guilt. "We're all adults here. You wouldn't be unable to handle it, would you?" Burgess Hudson's smile was icy as he loosened his tie. If that's the case, it would be impolite not to reciprocate. Realizing what he was about to do, I almost ran to the bathroom, but his long legs were faster than I was. "Burgess, don't be ridiculous." He could handle it, but I couldn't. Burgess Hudson snorted, casually tugging at my collar, his deep gaze surveying the room. "Is this where you live?" The room was 15 square meters, with a kitchen and bedroom connected. Though not large, it had a big window and, most importantly, a separate bathroom. After years of renting, this was the best place I had found. However, with him looking at it, it felt quite embarrassing. "It's close to the hotel where I used to work." Burgess Hudson sighed and placed his hand on my head. "It's my fault for coming back so late." Damn, how did he manage to be so charming? I wanted to cry again. "Burgess, stop messing around." Burgess Hudson didn't say anything. He picked up the bag and suitcase from the floor and turned to leave. I grabbed the strap of the bag, trying to speak, but Burgess Hudson stopped. "I'll give you an explanation. Will you trust me just this once?" Escaping turned into cohabitation. I never expected to see Burgess Hudson cooking one day. "You can cook too." Burgess Hudson smiled indulgently. "It's quite sour." Okay, I admit it. I was feeling a bit sour myself. I learned to cook out of necessity, but as a wealthy young man, he didn't need to do it himself. Burgess Hudson shrugged. "I can't get used to foreign food, so I have to cook for myself." "Didn't your aunt come to stay with you?" After Burgess Hudson turned 3, he preferred not to have outsiders around, which led his aunt to become a full-time housewife. Later, when Burgess Hudson and I were traveling, she even mentioned buying a house abroad to take care of everything for us. She didn't. A flash of anger appeared in Burgess Hudson's eyes, and his voice turned cold. Noticing that I was startled, he softened his tone and explained, "She played me a recording of you trying to blackmail her." "Sylvia, do you really think I don't know your worth?" I was deeply moved, trying hard not to cry. When his aunt suggested it, I had refused without hesitation because, even if things between us were impossible, I didn't want to spoil the memories he had of me. But in the end, I couldn't bear to upset him or his aunt, so I reluctantly agreed. "Do you think so little of me?" Burgess Hudson smiled gently. "People change, but pride in one's core doesn't. I trust you. Didn't you trust that I'd come back for you?" Though reluctant to admit it, I had always believed he would come back, no matter what obstacles we faced. That belief kept me from giving up. "What about your aunt and the others?" Burgess Hudson ruffled my hair. "Don't overthink it. I said I'd give you an explanation." I thought for a moment, unable to hide my feelings of inadequacy. I entered society right after finishing high school. Though I later attended night classes and obtained a bachelor's degree, it was only useful for appearances. It's better to say I graduated from high school than to mention a college degree. Burgess Hudson embraced me again. "You're already amazing. If it were either of us, we might not have your strength." I smiled through my tears. "When we were in middle school, there was a girl who, due to family issues, developed psychological problems. We even formed a support group to help her stay in school. But the reality was more complex than we imagined. Life supported by charity couldn't withstand even a little storm. The girl felt like a pitiful creature, tired of others' pity, so she climbed to the roof. Though her life was saved, she lived like a wandering soul. In a way, her plight made me change my approach to life, and made me grateful for the mental strength I had, believing that one day, Burgess Hudson would return. "Thank you." Burgess Hudson smiled slightly. "It's thanks to both of us." When his aunt arrived, despite being mentally prepared, I still felt a pang of guilt. The gap between Burgess Hudson and me was something no one could accept. His aunt looked around, her expression dark. This place has quite a bit of life in it. I nervously twisted my fingers. Auntie, please have a seat. I'll make you some tea. Sylvia, don't trouble yourself. Just sit. What had to come eventually faced us. I took a deep breath, smiled, and Saturday back down on the couch. Sylvia, I actually feel quite guilty for coming today. I regret that. For Burgess, you had to endure a bad reputation. You're a good child. Despite what happened at home, you've managed to stay strong and grown up so well. My heart tightened. Auntie, I know there's a mismatch between us, but I still hope you can give us a chance. Before his aunt could respond, Burgess Hudson walked in, his gaze urgent. He first checked on me with concern, then turned to his aunt. Have you thought this through? I tugged at his sleeve, signaling him to be less blunt. Burgess Hudson calmed down. Mom, I've been regretting it for 8 years. I thought our future would still face many hurdles, but in just a few days, our parents had met, reuniting after many years. Old friends were emotional and the atmosphere initially chilled, but after a few drinks, hearts began to open up. As I looked around and felt the atmosphere returning to how it used to be, I held Burgess Hudson's hand, my eyes stinging with tears. Burgess Hudson lifted his hand and tapped my forehead, his eyes glinting with a hint of red. You've grown. I laughed through my tears. He was still as stubborn as ever. The day before the engagement, Sophia Watt found me. Compared to her earlier arrogance, she now appeared visibly melancholic. She stared at me intently before finally asking the question that had been on her mind. Why are you two still together? I understood what she meant. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure my place in his life when we reunited, even though there was a moment when I almost believed her about her relationship with Burgess Hudson. I came to realize something else. Burgess Hudson had forgotten me. After meeting him again at the villa and becoming his caretaker, I became even more convinced of this. I just no longer had the confidence I once did, and felt a bit insecure about my place in his heart. But you can't be deceived by someone's eyes. The bond formed from years of close interaction isn't a lie either. Besides, we're not mute. We can't fake a deeply passionate, tortured love. He might express himself subtly, but to me, every word and action tells me that he's still the same Burgess as before. If I had to rationalize it, I say that we were apart for too long and missed out on too much, so we don't want to waste any more time on unimportant things. That's why we could be contradictory, secretly happy about waiting for each other. As night fell, I lay in Burgess Hudson's arms, gazing at the starry sky together. Burgess Hudson's broad hand rhythmically patted my arm. Before I came back, I was always thinking about how to punish you. If you had acted up and called me out back then, we wouldn't have been apart for 8 years, I said. Well, I have my pride too, you know. Sure, making a fuss could have potentially resolved the family issues with his parents' involvement, but I have lost face in front of them in the future, Burgess Hudson continued, playfully scratching my hair. But after coming back and seeing you, all my anger disappeared. Instead, I was annoyed with myself for coming back too late. I shook my head. It's not too late, Burgess Hudson snorted. Right, Sylvia is so strong. If I had returned a few years later, I might not have been able to reach her, I said. Who is he even mad at? Burgess Hudson turned his head, his eyes showing a trace of bitterness. Didn't I make myself clear? You still hesitate and doubt my intentions, I said. This was indeed my fault. It wasn't a lack of confidence. I just tested things a bit. Burgess Hudson snorted again, then pulled me tightly into his embrace. I understand. Hearing this, I was deeply touched. Burgess Hudson added, you always used to do this when we were kids playing hard to get, making me surrender first. Well, even though I didn't want to admit it, he wasn't wrong. But who told him to be willing? This story is now complete. Feel free to subscribe to the channel to get the latest content and updates, with new novels added every day.